Distributech 2023, one of the sponsors of these interviews, and these are interviews with thought leaders from around North America and the globe. Our sponsors are H2Scan. H2Scan is the leading sensor manufacturer for hydrogen sensing in a lot of different applications, in transformers, in battery room safety, in processes and safety, in industrial, and in the future hydrogen economy. So I want to thank our sponsors, and I want to thank all of our guests, and I hope you enjoy this interview. My next guest is Phil Jones. He's the managing director of Copperleaf Americas, right?
Yes.
So that's the entire
nice to meet you.
the entire hemisphere, Americas, right?
Yeah,
Latin, South, Central, North.
All of it.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
All of it. Glad to have you with us. First of all, tell me a little bit about your background in the power industry. How did you get involved in this industry?
I got involved in this industry because of an idea, actually. So I joined a company that works in the power industry. But the idea that attracted me to it was the idea of how do we work with companies like utilities, asset-intensive organizations, and help them make better decisions about how and when and where they're spending their money to drive the most value for them and their stakeholders. And that idea is what attracted me to Copperleaf, and that's how I got into the industry.
Okay. So an idea and that is a good idea, by the way, help people make better decisions about their assets.
Yeah.
Okay, why Copperleaf, and what is it that Copperleaf does to resolve those issues?
Copperleaf is a software company. We're based out of Vancouver, BC. Our business is really completely focused on value-based, risk-informed decision-making in asset-intensive businesses. Most of our clients are utilities.
Say that fast 10 times. Value-based, risk-informed
decision-making.
Decision-making.
Right.
You guys have thought about that, obviously.
Sorry, I probably came across a little too quickly.
No, that was brilliant.
You do slow down and think about it some. What does that actually mean?
Yeah.
And we'll kind of dig into that more, but it's like, how do you make decisions in an organization where the world is becoming more and more complex?
Okay, we are going to break more,
Yeah.
but before we get to the solution and what you guys are doing, let's talk about the problems. You know, supply chain issues were all we heard about last year when we were doing these types of interviews.
Yeah.
They've not gone away, but now we've added to some other problems in the industry.
Right.
As an expert, as a thought leader in the industry, what do you think some of the problems that utilities, or it's true of any asset-rich organization, but utilities particularly, because they're going through more change now than possibly they've ever gone through, other than when power started, right?
Yeah.
It's unbelievable, the change. What are some of the issues that you see the industry dealing with?
So probably the first thing, let's back up 10 or 15 years, and everybody just talked about safe, affordable, reliable power. That was sort of the model forever, right?
Safe, affordable, reliable. You're exactly right.
Right? That was the model. That's everybody was trying to deliver that. Looked at anybody's mission statement, but the biggest challenge I see, and supply chain is an issue, and it's kind of, for us, we're kind of looking past that because we're kind of thinking on longer term issues, is take safe, affordable, reliable and add in some serious complexities like climate change. And so now you have to build a more resilient network, a more resilient infrastructure. That's expensive and it's complicated to do. How do you get to net zero where you're trying to reverse climate change? That is a huge investment and also quite challenging. In addition, how do you add in, how do you incorporate in your decision making like social and environmental equity? Right, and to know that you're being fair about how you're investing your dollars. So the mandate of utilities has gone beyond just safe, affordable, reliable, and you have to deal with these big societal and global issues and their impact on that. And so that's a huge challenge for utilities, trying to figure out, again, what's the right place, how and where and when to spend their money to achieve this bigger set of outcomes than they've ever been challenged with before.
And they're so engineering rich, utilities are, right?
Yeah.
Engineers like to solve problems, but they're also reluctant to change.
Yeah.
And so we've got all these massive problems or opportunities that we got to take advantage of. I mean, decarbonization, the safe, reliable, that has now changed to decarbonization, decentralization, digitalization, right?
Yeah.
Distributed energy, a whole bunch of Ds that are going on there.
And all while the existing infrastructure is aging and failing, and that was going to be enough of a challenge if you didn't add all this on top of it.
I had a 1965 Rambler that I drove from Georgia Tech campus down in Atlanta up to my mother's apartment in North Atlanta, and I had my best friend Lewis Martin have to change the wiper on the one side while we were driving at 60 miles an hour up Peachtree Street, maybe 55 miles an hour up Peachtree Street in the rain.
Yeah.
And he's leaning. That's what we're asking the utilities to do. Change while you.
Yeah, it's like you're rebuilding the car while you're driving it, right? By the way, I went to Georgia Tech. I have a bachelor's and master's in electrical engineering, so go Jackets.
Yeah, excellent. I'm a mechanical engineer, sorry to say.
No, it's all good.
I talk to all these electrical engineers and I say, we make everything work and you just power what we make. But anyway, that's where we go.
Yeah.
So Copperleaf, obviously, the idea has expanded tremendously given the changes that are going on in the industry. How does Copperleaf help?
So kind of going back to the premise of what I said, our entire business is focused on this decision-making problem, right? So one of the things, if you look at what utilities are challenged with now, they're trying to figure out, well, how, given I have to deliver a broader set of outcomes than I've ever had to before, absolutely, how do I make decisions? That's where we help, right? So we have an approach and a solution that's all about value-based, risk-informed decision-making. You'll hear us talk about that a lot. But it takes people from what's typically a fairly political process run on spreadsheets into an enterprise software tool that we produce that manages the process of how do you intake investments, how do you describe the value of those investments on this broader spectrum, right, in a quantified way, and then how do you, at a management level, how do you optimize your plans so that you're delivering plans that meet your constraints and targets and deliver the maximum possible value. And that's a process that's people managing billions of dollars are doing it in spreadsheets, and it's really an impossible objective to achieve in spreadsheets. And so we're focused on an enterprise software solution to enable that process and that kind of optimization.
Sounds like a great tool for ISO 55000. The asset management Sightline is exactly, you need to see line of sight all the way down from the CE level down to the managing guy on the ground, to be able to understand it.
It's interesting you mentioned that. We actually used to call the product C55.
Because
the 55 was for ISO 55000 and PAS 55, but we just call it Copperleaf Suite. But you're right. It's if in an asset management context, some people look at us as an asset management solution. Some people look at us as a capital planning solution, and some people look at us as a finance tool. But ultimately, it's how do you connect your decisions to the strategic objectives of the organization and make sure you understand every dollar and resource you're spending. How does it align with those outcomes you're trying to deliver?
So it's valuable to everybody along that chain, obviously, but it sounds like the person, because there's people managing a current infrastructure, right? Yeah. I'm going to ask you how it helps them, and then there's people planning on the new infrastructure. I mean, right now, some power transformer manufacturers are 3.5 years out, so they got to manage whatever they got. And demand curve is now taking power up, so that hockey stick effect is there. So they're buying transformers to replace aging transformers, but also to create as electrification of transportation comes along. So I'm going to break it down in my simple thinking, mine as a mechanical engineer from Georgia Tech. Those that are managing the installed base versus those that are planning for a new installed base. How does Copperleaf work for either of those?
Yeah, so it's interesting now. Those are sort of blending, right? Because they're not just replacing an asset with a like for like, because it's aging or something. Right. They're also saying, well, what additional benefits can I get from it? So those two decisions kind of blend, right? But if you look at just
stop there for a minute. Yeah. That's the hardest thing, in my opinion, that's going on with the politics of I don't mean that negatively, because they are so siloed. You do this, and we do this. And what you just said is, we're working in your area now, and you need to know what we're doing because you're going to manage what we do. It has made the decision-making significantly more complex. Sorry to interrupt.
So I'll tell you how we help with both those things, but I'm also going to comment on that because I think there's this trend in the industry that we're seeing that could be interesting. But so for existing infrastructure, let's just say you just need to maintain existing infrastructure. One of the key things we can do is we can leverage asset data and help understand, okay, what is the health and the risk of these assets and how is that going to change over time? And we give visibility into that risk at a global view, and it can be very granular down into detailed asset level by leveraging data in the systems that they have, and help them understand where the risk is and how it's evolving over time, and therefore it helps them optimize their investments in a risk mitigation standpoint. So preserve that network, right? That's a pure sort of thing we can do on the sustainability, sustainment of existing assets. But now those same decisions they're looking at those and going, well, if we're going to make that investment, make that change, or do that maintenance, or replace that asset, what else could we do? Could we do a capacity upgrade? Do we want to redesign the substation or start moving in DERs? And so those also get evaluated in the system. If we do this, what are the benefits of making those kinds of decisions? So they become more integrated. One of the interesting things I've seen, we've seen this, so I'm based in Canada. I'm originally from Georgia, but my wife imported me to Canada 25 years ago. So I've been
I grew up in Toronto, and I got imported to Atlanta
there
a
you
long
go.
time ago. Yeah.
So we've seen a number of Canadian utilities, I'll use like BC Hydro as an example, because of this need to do more integrated planning, they moved away from these silos of G, T, and D, and they've moved into a different operating model. They have like an integrated planning and asset management team, and that's focused on the need to integrate all these different decisions, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think that's a trend we're going to see more of.
Have you mentioned BC Hydro? Have you seen that? Because the municipality-owned utilities have a little bit more freedom to make. They're more reluctant to change, but they have a little bit more freedom. IOUs have been so focused on what they've been focused on. Have you seen that trend across from what we call co-ops to municipals to regional? Is that happening everywhere? Because you're the second person that has mentioned it in any of these interviews. I've never really heard where it's been implemented that well, because you have the old line, and we're engineers. We've been doing it this way a long time. Why do we have to change again? The reluctance to change has either gotten in the way of making it happen successfully, or it's just so large. I mean, the data management part of it is so large, because now I got to give you access to data, information that you never had to have before, and you probably put it on a spreadsheet somewhere in your desk.
The way I think about it, Alan, is the organizations that are making these operating model changes, I think it's because they finally came to the conclusion it's way more difficult to stay in the model that they've been in, and when they need to do more integrated planning, than it is to shift into a different operating model. I'm not saying everybody's going to do it or has to do it, but I think the organizations that have, they just came to that conclusion that the legacy operating model is more difficult to operate in. Right, and that's why they made those changes. But I can't speak for all the different companies. But I think
don't want you to pick on any. We'll give BC Hydro some love, but I know some places that I know the people. They are entrenched in the way we've done it. No, this is transmission, and it's always been transmission. You're going, hey, how are you doing with your wind and solar? And then they get a blank look on their face. So.
Yeah, and it is a challenge. Organizations trying to get different parts of the business to align, right? And one of the things, another area we can help is when people are making more siloed decisions, in our system, you can see across these things, and you can actually see, this investment over here in distribution is impacting an asset that also we're making a transmission decision that's going to have an impact on that asset as well. And so you can start seeing this connectivity, in across investment decisions that would otherwise be completely siloed.
I think that DER and all of the change, the decarbonization and everything, we're going from that good old step down grid, right, to step everywhere, and it's gone from that transmission, generation, transmission, distribution to a situation now where we're an inverter based, and it's going to get worse. And by that I mean it's going to get more challenging than it's going to get better. So obviously having a tool to do that. So that's the line of question I want to go again, because I'm fascinated about Copperleaf. I wish we had a lot of time to delve into it, but this can't be a commercial for a Copperleaf. But I am fascinated with the idea that a tool could help people make some of these structural changes, support making these structural changes to make it easier for everybody. And I assume Copperleaf does that.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, if you look at what does every organization do day to day, right? They're constantly making decisions about how and where and when to spend their money, right? And that can be, like in a lot of organizations, it's almost like an event. They have their annual capital planning cycle or something. And then what we do isn't restricted to capital. It's an easy way to talk about it, though. And they do their 5-year plan, and sometimes even those are disconnected sometimes, right? So for us, planning is actually a continuous thing. It's happening all the time. You're adjusting your plan all the time. You're executing a plan. Things are happening. Emergent work's coming in. Strategies changing. You have storm response that disrupts a lot of your plan for the next quarter or the year. And so we're enabling this continuous planning process that the whole organization can participate in and understand what's happening next, and when we need to make changes to the plan, what's the most impactful way to do that to deliver the best possible outcomes. And so that bridges across silos. It actually, we use this phrase, it helps you compare apples to oranges to cats, right? Right? And it's trying to break down those silos and create this transparent, consistent way to understand value and talk about it, and actually then communicate that to all your stakeholders, including regulators, right? Like, and that's a huge challenge for the industry, is how do we actually describe what we're doing and why in a way that regulators can understand, and then understand why you can't do everything. You can't afford to do everything, so here's the best possible plan we have given, the funding levels, that we're asking for.
And given in the United States 50 different regulatory bodies in every state based on one thing, mostly capital spending. Right? You want a rate increase, capital spending there. And the change from calling customers ratepayers to calling them customers is, there's so many more dynamics. We could go on and on, but I want to switch gears again. You're traveling with me at 37,000 feet. You're sitting next to me. You're a thought leader. And I'm saying, okay, I love what you've told me about Copperleaf. I think you guys have an opportunity to help a lot of utilities, whether they're small, large, and other organizations, adapt to all of this change and make better, value-based, risk-informed. Did I get it right?
Yeah, you got it.
Got it.
High five.
Thank you, very good. What do you think the storm clouds on the horizon 5 and 10 years look like for the industry?
Yeah, so it's a really, I've been thinking about this a lot lately. Really interesting challenge when you talk about this broadened mandate that we were talking about earlier, right? Where you have to not just deal with safe, affordable, reliable, but you have to extend it into resilience and net zero and social equity and all these other challenges and outcomes you're trying to deliver. How does a utility afford to do that, right? And is the regulatory, one of my kind of things about this is, because we work with clients elsewhere globally, right? And a lot of clients in the UK and stuff who have different regulatory models. It's not cost of service, it's performance-based. And I really do have, I think one of the things we've seen in Canada is this more move to performance-based regulations. And that might be something we see more of eventually in the United States.
We're beginning to see it.
Yeah.
California's kind of leading edge on some of that.
Because the capital return model doesn't really incent you to go off and deal with the reliability issues that get expensed. And I think that worked really well for a long time when things were newer, right? And there was huge capital investments. There's going to be huge capital investments going forward in all the energy transition stuff we need to do. So that would be supported by cost of service. But other missions of a utility, the cost of service model may not be the right model. So it's one of these questions of what's going to happen in a regulatory sense, and also what's going to happen in terms of government support for some of the energy transition, because it's really hard to do all of this and have it just go to the customer base in terms of ratepayers, right? So that's something that I think the industry is still grappling with, and governments are grappling with, is how do we actually get to a net zero place, given that without putting all the burden on just the customer base, right? I think
a good example of the regulatory support government can give is the IRA, terribly named the Inflation Reduction Act. On wind or solar, you used to, every year you had to wait until what the Congress was going to do the next year. How can you do any long-range planning? Now, you got a 10-year runway that you can at least say, hey, we're going here and this is what we're expecting. So those are the kinds of things. So if you're in government and you're listening, make wise decisions to help the industry make wise decisions, and put regulatory and policy in place that works for the future, doesn't work for the past. But anyway,
I think it's a team sport. Like getting to where we need to go, it's a team sport.
Yeah. So when you hear me, if you ever hear me at a talk or you see one of these and you hear me compare apples and oranges, and what was the other one?
Cats.
I made that up.
Okay.
I will give you attribution though, Phil.
That's okay. I appreciate it.
Okay. Our guest has been Phil Jones. Phil is the managing director of Copperleaf. Brilliant solution. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks very much, Alan. I really enjoyed it.
Appreciate it. This has been an APC Technologies production, and we thank you for joining us. Our sponsors have been H2Scan and Distributech. And of course, the communities of APC Technologies, which is Transform Technology, Power Systems Technology, Green Energy Technology, and Women in Power Systems. So thank you.